Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone who's joining me today. We have Chief Marty Martinez, Jerome Smith, John Barros, Rita Nueves from the Public Health Commission, Frida Bransfield from City Hall, Commissioner William Gross, former U.S. Attorney Wayne Budd. I think I got everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I want to start with the latest numbers of COVID-19. In Massachusetts, as of yesterday, the state reached a total of 104,667 cases. We had a one-day increase of 519 cases. The state has now confirmed total deaths of 7,492, and that's up from 38 from the previous day. The Boston numbers as of yesterday are now recorded at 13,118 cases, a one-day increase of 44 cases. We have confirmed that 7,987 people have fully recovered from COVID-19 in the city of Boston, and 673 people have passed away, and that's 2 additional deaths from the day before. And I just want to say our prayers continue to be with the families of all the loved ones who are struggling with this illness and who have lost loved ones during this difficult time. Today, I want to take this opportunity to talk about racism and equality. We know about the inequalities in our country, and we're working every day in the city of Boston to eliminate them. Our resiliency policy defines racial inequality as a slow-moving disaster that harms communities and individuals over the course of a lifetime. From the moment the COVID crisis hit, we saw very stark pictures of what that looks like in financial vulnerability, housing insecurity. As I've reported here many times, in access to food and technology, and certainly in health impacts. We saw the urgency it would take to meet those deep needs in our communities, and we have acted with that urgency. Equity has been the center of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and our goal has always been to recover from this pandemic in a more equitable state than we entered it. Then on May 25th, George Floyd, who no one knew, at least in Boston, was murdered in Minneapolis. And then the public conversation changed. Lifetimes of experiences were brought up to the surface in justified anger. Young people refused and still refuse to accept that injustice of the past, and that would not be their reality. A movement grew that has brought a new urgency to this moment in our nation's history, not just our city, but our nation. I stood at this podium a little over a week ago and I said I was going to listen, and I've been listening to that movement. I've been listening to Black Americans and people of color in my life on my team here in the city. We've been in dialogues about their experiences, real experiences, how racism shapes lives and hurts communities as we're seeing right now. And we're determined to accelerate our work towards systemic change, to renew our nation and our city's promise of equal opportunity and justice for every single person. Out of that conversation has come an initial set of action for racial equity that I'm going to announce today. What I'm announcing today is the beginning, it's not the end. There will be more announcements and more work that we have to do. But first, I want to declare racism to be a public health crisis in the city of Boston. The health impacts of historic and systemic racism are clear in our COVID-19 case numbers, and the impacts go far beyond the current crisis. So we'll be backing this declaration with an initial investment of $3 million. That's going to be transferred from the police overtime budget to the Boston Public Health Commission. The Health Commission will work with our city's departments, including our police department, on strategies to direct access and the impacts of racism has on the lives and the health of Boston residents. I'd like to invite Chief Marty Martinez now to come up and talk a little more about what we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Racism is a driving force that shapes access to the social determinants of health, like housing, education, and employment. And it's a barrier to health equity for all Bostonians. In a city like ours, we have to focus on the impact that racism has on the lives of all of our neighbors and how it impacts the overall health of the city. The executive order that the mayor will launch and the declaration that racism is a public health crisis is an important step in ensuring intentional focus on this work and resources that will allow us to do what's necessary. But more than just the executive order, it comes with actions. We will work on an 8-step strategy to approach this work led by the Boston Public Health Commission in partnership with Health and Human Services. Actions that include the creation of policy and practice solutions that work to dismantle systemic racism and create barriers to strong public health. That will include an assessment of health equity in all of our policies to identify where there are gaps and where we can create real measures of success. We will create a Boston Health Equity Now plan that will detail objectives and measurable goals that will get to the root causes of these inequities, not simply just respond to them. We will continue our engagement of historically underserved communities to be at the table for decision making and ensure we're moving in the right direction. We will have complete and regular availability of specific race and ethnicity data that documents the health inequities that exist so that we can ensure we're collecting, disseminating, and looking at the gaps that exist in partnership with our hospitals and our healthcare centers. And then we will use that data to analyze the real facts, to analyze the gaps, and do the work necessary to close those inequities. We will continue our focus on access to prevention and treatment that's culturally and linguistically competent. We will develop direct service programs and services that address the negative impact of these inequities, and we will join advocacy at the state and national level for these policies. It's important to not only make the declaration and important to not only have this executive order, but it's important that we have an intentional focus on what causes these inequities and these disparities. And at the root, it is racism. As the mayor said, we've seen it play out through our COVID-19 and through the work we've had to do, and we continue to see it play out today. It's been at the core of the Boston Public Health Commission's work, and it will continue to be at a core with a stronger intentionality, more resources, and the full weight of the mayor behind this work. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your leadership on this, and we will continue to move this work forward.
Thank you, Marty. In addition to the declaration, we're also taking a number of steps in law enforcement accountability. We're going to establish a process to strengthen the current existing community oversight panel that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. These steps call for a 10-point action plan put forward by the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus and other elected officials of color in Boston and the Commonwealth. I want to thank all the elected officials for their advocacy, in particular members of the Boston City Council. And I will join them in advocating for change. In addition, the Boston Police Department has completed a review of its use of force policies outlined by the national 8 Can't Wait movement. The Boston Police Department is clarifying rules to meet the standards and has immediately implemented several reforms that we hadn't previously implemented. These are all use of force policies proven to reduce the likelihood of violence. I want to commend and thank the Commissioner Gross, for his leadership in acting swiftly to drive these important changes forward. I also want to thank the members of the command staff of the police department for taking these issues very seriously. The Boston Police Department is also adopting the training program known as Ethical Policing Courageous, EPIC. This means that officers will not only be required to intervene when they witness unnecessary use of force, they'll be trained with strategies to preventing abuses and intervening if they occur. I can also announce that moving forward, the Boston Police Department will no longer use the hair test for evidence of drug use in officers or recruits. I want to thank the police unions in their partnership in this decision that we're able to eliminate the hair test here in the city of Boston. I can also announce steps that we're taking for the fiscal 2021 budget to further ground public safety and community health and well-being. I am proposing to the Boston City Council to reallocate 20%, or $12 million, of the Boston Police Department's overtime budget. The money will be invested instead in community programs for youth, for homelessness, for people struggling with the effects of inequality. That includes $3 million to implement our public health declaration, $1 million to support trauma response and counseling at the Boston Public Health Commission, $2 million for community investments through other city departments, including violence prevention, language access, food security, immigrant advancement, elder support, and the Human Rights Commission. $2 million for programming supporting minority and women-owned businesses, $2 million for housing security and ending youth homelessness, and $2 million for emergency clinicians and mental health supports to provide through the Boston Police Department when they respond to crisis. Taken together, this is a significant program of reforms and investments. And I've said our new policy and budget announcements are important, but they're certainly not enough. We need to keep the community involved, sustain this conversation, and continue to make and demand change. So I'm also announcing a process for community input, review, and reform. I have signed the Mayor's Pledge issued by the Obama Foundation and My Brother's Keeper Alliance. The My Brother's Keeper was launched in 2014 to empower young men and women of color, and Boston was one of the initial cities. We were there at the founding, and we made sure that we continue to be part of this alliance. What this pledge says is, 1, we will review all of our police use of force policies. 2, we will engage communities by including a diverse range of input, experiences, and stories. 3, we'll report the findings of our review to the community and seek feedback. 4, we will reform all of our use of force policies based on the conversations that are happening. I want to be clear that our process is not designated to delay change. It's designed to sustain change. And to make sure our commitment translates into action, I'm creating a new task force. It will be led by Bostonians from civil rights organizations, the legal community, and the faith community. It will be chaired by Wayne Budd, the former U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. He's a respected and longtime leader in Boston's legal community and certainly civil rights community. The task force will conduct an immediate review of all police force policies and other equity issues at the Boston Police Department. And it will provide guidance on how we strengthen the co-op board to ensure that their work is effective. And I will be accepting any changes that they recommend to the co-op board. This task force will begin immediately and produce a recommendation within 60 days. The community will then have time to review the recommendations and provide feedback, and we will announce reforms. We're not going to let this moment or this movement pass us by. I pledge to make Boston a national leader in this work, and we are following through on our pledge. At this point, I'd like to ask former U.S. Attorney Wayne Budd to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you on behalf of the task force, we thank you for the opportunity to serve. We understand the importance of the tasks that you have given us, and we understand that these are to be undertaken promptly and efficiently. And you can be assured, Mr. Mayor, that it will be given our very, very best effort. So again, thank you for this opportunity to serve you and the city of Boston.
Thank you, sir. It's this kind of leadership that takes our whole city working together. This has to be a truly collective effort across government and community. So I'm calling on all of us, every Bostonian, every elected official, to be part of the solution. At the same time, we must continue to listen to the voices at the center of the conversation. As a white elected official, I depend on the guidance and leadership of people of color and leaders of color and residents of color. I want to thank all of them for their leadership and their partnership, from the state legislatures to the members of my cabinet to the members of my team here at City Hall, friends and former colleagues who have been reaching out to me every single day over the last 2 weeks, and to the Boston police officers of color who are respected and beloved members of our community. I just also want to recognize the members of the Boston Police Department. They are truly committed, our officers. They're committed to community policing and positive reform since my first day as mayor of this great city. Our offices continue to build strong foundations of trust in relationships with young people and members of all of our different neighborhoods here in the city. Their work starts with a positive interaction with our communities in our classrooms and our schools, and in programs like Coffee with a Cop, the flashlight walks, the peace walks, at Christmas time, Shop with a Cop. They provide prevention and diversion supports for at-risk youth and families. They offer pathways for people, and our young people in particular, away from the violence. They're essential partners in some of our most effective life-changing programs that we have here in the city. As a result of our Boston Police men and women's work from 2013 to 2019, complaints of improper behavior fell by 40%. Complaints of excessive use of force dropped by over 50%. Over that same time frame, the crime rate in Boston went down by nearly 30%. Our arrests in our city are down by 33%. Officers have taken over 5,000 guns off the streets of Boston. They've made this progress over the last 6 years by lifting people up, not locking people up. That's what we're going to keep doing here in Boston. The men and women of the Boston Police Department are increasingly reflective of our communities that they serve. And let's not forget, these officers are sons and daughters of proud parents. They are mothers and fathers who love their children. They're coaches and mentors in our community, and they too are feeling the same emotion of this moment, and they too want to be part of the solution. They continue to deserve our respect and gratitude. We all know we still have work to do. That's very, very clear. But we have the right police department to partner with the community to do that work here in Boston. I also want to remind all of us that systemic change must go far beyond law enforcement. We began this year by launching bold plans, the call for record investments in school equity and housing equity in particular. We cannot be certain what will happen with the state budget, but on the city side, we will follow through on those funding commitments, including supports for struggling schools to close the racial opportunity gaps, and the first city-funded rental voucher program in the history to provide struggling families with stability and security. And as we continue to face this pandemic, we will continue to be guided by our community and our COVID-19 Health Inequities Task Force, both in healthcare response and economic recovery. Whether we're fighting the COVID virus or the virus of racism, we are going to move forward in equity, and Boston is going to lead, inspired by the best aspects of our history and guided by the diverse members of our community. I want to thank you, and now I'll open up for questions. The question basically is, I'm going to frame it, the question is about people are saying that when the demonstrators are done, we're going to go back to the way things were. Coronavirus has taught me a lot as far as watching what's happened over the last 3 months. I've talked to the cabinet and people that we have an opportunity with coronavirus to really make substantial change here in the city of Boston in the way that we deliver services. And I thought we were good before, but it showed some opportunities for us to do better. With the murder of George Floyd, as I said, things got more tense. Maybe in some parts of this country and maybe in some neighborhoods, we're going to go back to the way it was. But as I've said from the beginning, before Mr. Floyd was murdered, the new normal is not going to be what we experienced in the past. It's incumbent upon me, it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to move forward. As I've said before, that too often we've seen a shooting of a black man and we have protests and we turn the page. Sometimes when we turn the page is because we can't get the proper federal attention or attention to it. It's incumbent upon me as mayor and the rest of us not to let that happen. This is different because the activism in this moment and the conversations I've had with young people in my administration, the emotions that they have, they're ready for change and they're ready to do the work they have to do. And I think this is a unique moment in time that we can look back on, some generations after us can look back on and say they're grateful for the second quarter of the 21st century, 2020, really began change in our country. The question is, what do I say to the police that we're moving this money from the overtime budget and it's not fair to them? The answer is the money that we're going to be investing is actually benefiting them to deal with racism, to deal with health inequities, to deal with opportunities for our youth, to deal with homelessness. I think that when we think about policing, the conversation has been around defunding police departments and changing the way police departments are. What we have to do is continue. This is, as I mentioned earlier, these two steps are the first two steps I'm taking today in declaring a racism a public health crisis and also working to do reforms in the police department. There are other steps that we have to take in housing, in education, in economic development. All of those, it's all of it together. That's a great question. The question is, why am I doing it now and taking the aggressiveness? I would say that when I became mayor in 2014, I took very bold steps then with the police department in putting in reforms, changing the way that we do training with de-escalation. And I think that the results are in the numbers that I mentioned here earlier. Complaints against police officers are down, arrests are down, crime is down. And I would say that a lot of the reforms that we instituted back in 2015 were effective. I think now there's been a call by Bostonians to review our policing tactics and review what we have. And I think there's never harm in always reviewing. There's always room for improvement. There's room for improvement to be a bit better mayor every day. And I think that now is the exact right time to review our policies. And what we're doing is, Commissioner did it last week with the 8 Can't Wait and went through with his command staff and started talking about it. And this task force that we're putting together is going to be an outside independent task force that's going to be looking at the policies in the police department and hopefully maybe coming back with some great recommendations. Maybe not a lot of recommendations, but I can't make that judgment. We're going to let them make the decision. What do you want? You ask me.
I was just asking Commissioner what he thinks of these possible reforms and the impact of the budget.
Let me just answer right now. I mean, if to go, no, come on.
I didn't hear him.
What do you think about the reforms?
Commissioner, just your reaction to that we're doing.
I can tell you right now, since the mayor's come in, we've reviewed policies, procedures, rules, and regs. I'd just like to inform everyone that it was President Obama that ordered a 21st century study in policing because of the shooting of unarmed black and brown men. At the end of that study, there were recommendations for each and every police department in the United States to follow. Community policing, dialogue, transparency, fair and impartial policing, procedural justice, de-escalation. And then the president said, if you want to learn about this model, come to Boston. Now that shows you we've come a long way from the old Boston to the new. But as the mayor stated, there's always room for improvement. The recommendations for the police department to follow, we already had several of those in place. But I can tell you honestly, at the death of Mr. Floyd, It is the duty and responsibility, excuse me, of each and every one of our citizens to make sure that that cowardly murder will not happen here in Boston. So even though we had many things in place, we do want different eyes on our policies, our procedures, and we do want to move forward because we have one of the top community policing models. And that means working in partnership with the community to solve problems and create a better quality of life for all. And it's exactly what we're talking about today. So the Boston Police is not going to be defensive, adversarial. That's what makes us who we are today. This is a community policing model, and the people that we serve should have the expectation that this department will improve each and every year, and I think we're taking those steps. And the panel that we have put together, led by Mr. Budd, one of the most brilliant legal minds in the country, will ensure that anyone looking in knows that this is a fair and equitable look, not only for the police department and all that we serve, but shows that we are a leader in this nation in making changes to the positive. So, we'll get the job done. Quite frankly, what I've heard in the community is we wear too many hats anyway. A child doesn't want to go to school, you call the Boston Police. A child's on the bus being unruly, you call the Boston Police. There's an emotionally disturbed person in a home, you call the Boston Police. How many hats do you want us to wear? So, I think that responsibility should be spread out. Of course, we'll work in partnership with all of our partners. I've created the Bureau of Community Engagement to make sure we take care of our seniors, our youth, and our community, and that we never lose the cohesiveness that we have now. I created a street outreach unit, specifically dealing with problems of opioid abuse, homelessness, mental health issues, and human trafficking. And we have a strong partner there with First Justices and the community. We're just asking that more people come up and help solve problems, and that we shouldn't have to respond to each and every call when it doesn't require a uniform. It requires mental health care and other people coming to the plate. So that would cut overtime right there, sharing responsibilities. And again, no matter what, we will protect our city, we will protect our Commonwealth. The grumblings that I'm hearing is this. Last year we had one of the lowest crime rates in 20 years. We have one of the best community policing models. You see us out there each and every day. You see we're part of a change. The only grumblings I hear is some people have a short memory. But if you watch someone die for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, you want to make sure that's not happening in your city. We just asked this. Let's split that 8 minutes and 46 seconds. You take 4 minutes and 23 seconds to have a conversation about us and with us. And you'll see that you have more in common with us than you think. We want the conversation, we welcome it. And before I leave, again, it's working in partnerships with the communities we serve to solve all problems so that we all have a better quality of life. We will not share away from that or shy away from that. Thank you.
Let me just, I'll come back to that. Let me just real quick a follow-up, and I'm going to come to you. President Obama put together his task force back in 2015 after Ferguson. There was calls back then for police reform, and Boston was part of the conversation. I was called to the White House with a meeting, and when that report came out, 21st Century Police report came out, if you look in the archives, I believe there's 5 cities referenced as far as models for community policing. Boston was one of those models. We had just done some reforms. The incidents that happened in Minneapolis, the murder that happened in Minneapolis didn't happen on the streets of Boston. And, but I still think it's incumbent upon all of us to reflect on that incident and that murder and to improve our policing here in Boston. And I think that rather than fighting back, and rather than saying, yeah, but, I think it's opportunities to have a conversation. Somebody mentioned the young people that are here and what's the difference this time. The difference is we're listening and we're taking action. And that's what we need to continue to do. And I think we need to stay focused. When I say we, I'm talking about myself personally. Stay focused on the inequalities that people are talking about and explaining and providing to us. And that's how we move forward. Question. Great question. The question is, how do we make sure that overtime budget doesn't exceed the pay as it has in the past? And that's a great example. I mean, this year, as we were preparing our budget initially, we were going to level fund the police department's overtime budget. I canceled because of COVID-19, all of the parades and festivals in the city of Boston, including the marathon. And I thought at that particular moment there was an opportunity for some reinvestment back savings. And same when it snows out and we don't get much snow. Unfortunately, that's not the case because of the protest. And there's still communities that want, my phone has been off the hook about fireworks, people asking for police presence in the neighborhood about the fireworks. It's incumbent upon all of us in the department to make sure they live within their means when it comes to a budget. And we have to hold them to it. And on top of all of what we're talking about, we're in very, very tenuous economic times. We're going to be putting a budget in front of the City Council Monday. We're going to be making cuts on top of what we did the overtime. The overtime money is being reinvested, so it's not technically a cut from the bottom line. And the state still hasn't done their budget yet. So we have no idea if we have to go back into our budget at some point in the next fiscal year and reduce line items because we don't have the money to pay for what we're putting in there. So it's going to be, to answer your question quickly, it's incumbent upon the police department, and we're going to be, our A&F will be putting pressure on them to make sure they live within their means, meaning don't overspend. All right? Yeah, I literally just heard that. I got a text from one young man that works with me. I have not had a chance to look into it. I don't have an opinion on it. I just literally, before I came down, I got the text. So I'm gonna, when I go back up, I'm gonna make a call to him. Thank you.